the webinars. Okay, last month we began a new subsection called the centers and the senses as part of this bigger chapter called motion and the senses. Motion and the centers, that is. And then there's kind of a subtitle, centers and the senses, normal and supernormal. And we're about to find out what he means by that. And this chapter begins with a long footnote on the senses comprised of excerpts from the Secret Doctrine. In this footnote, we learned about indriya, the control of the senses in yoga practice. That sensation is latent in every atom of substance. That knowledge is the end of sense, meaning that the mind correlates and synthesizes the lower five senses. Also that every sense pervades every other sense. And finally, that the seven senses correspond with every other septonate in nature, such as the seven rays, the seven planes, seven subplanes, the chakras, and the seven sacred planets. Decay then suggests that we should think of the senses as a medium whereby the, quote, thinker comes in contact with his environment. We then took a look at the plane to sense correspondences and learned that the two lowest subplanes of the astral and physical planes are below the current human threshold, meaning that these four subplanes, quote, concern forms of life beneath the human altogether. This leaves the five higher subplanes of the physical and astral plane and the lowest five subplanes of the mental plane as the realm of endeavor for this fifth Aryan root race, which we're right in the middle of. And this brings us up to where we left off last time. We'll begin this session by rereading the paragraph we ended with last time. So could we start off with the reader, please?
And Paka, you want to read?
Sure. When the consciousness is centered on the fifth subplane, counting from below upwards, then the planes of abstraction, from the standpoint of man in the three worlds, supervene, the two subplanes of synthesis demonstrating through the synthesis of the five senses. In the evolution of the heavenly man, we have exactly the same thing. The five planes of endeavor, the five lower planes of the solar system, and the two higher planes of abstraction, the spiritual or monadic and the divine or logoic.
Thank you, Anne. Okay, first, when the consciousness is centered on the fifth subplane, counting from below upwards, then the planes of abstraction, from the standpoint of the man in the three worlds, supervene. The two subplanes of synthesis demonstrating through the synthesis of the five senses. So, from the perspective of lower mind, the lowest of the causal subplanes is a plane of abstraction. But from a higher perspective, it is considered to be relatively concrete, especially when compared with the sixth and seventh, counting from below upwards. These are the planes of higher mind, which is what we're endeavoring to contact. When a disciple is able to function on this third subplane, this third one here, then the influence of the first and second subplanes become a factor of greater importance than the whole lower quaternary. In other words, you begin to respond to abstract thought and the influence of the lower quaternary begins to shift and begins to fade. ability to tap into abstract levels will become increasingly common in the sixth subrace of this fifth root race. And there are those that believe that there's already people incarnating into this sixth subrace. And even more common, actually much more common, in the next root race, the sixth race, where higher mind will be actually the norm once that root race is well underway, like in the middle of that sixth root race. Okay, also in every septenate, factors 6 and 7 are considered correlative, that's for the sixth, and synthetic, that's for the seventh, in relation to the lower 5. Thus, the function of the sensory apparatus on the 2 highest subplanes of the mental plane is to correlate, then synthesize the 5 lower senses. DK tells us that when this period of initiatory development takes place, there is a refocusing of the causal body onto the second subplane of the mental plane, as shown by the egoic lotus in this illustration, resulting in an increased rapport with the energies of the first subplane, where the monastic permanent atom is, and importantly, where the lowest point and therefore access to the spiritual triad begins. Next up, in Evolution of the Heavenly Man, we have exactly the same thing. The 5 planes of endeavor, the 5 lower planes of the solar system, and the 2 higher planes of abstraction, the spiritual or monadic, and the divine or logoic. Okay, it's quote unquote exactly the same thing because the template for evolution applies to all the kingdoms of nature, including the 5th. DK gives us a step-by-step process just in a bit later in TCF. Could we get a reader, please?
Barbara, did you want to read? I can't.
Yes. The thought of union and the fusion underlies the entire scheme of evolution. Man, the heavenly man, and the cosmic man, the son of the father and the mother, have to A, radiate occult heat beyond their own individualized ring past knot. B, occultly blaze forth and demonstrate light or fiery objectivity. C, expand so as to include that which lies beyond their own immediate spheres. D, fuse and blend the 2 fires so as to produce perfectly the central fire, solar fire. E, blend spirit and matter so that a body is produced that will adequately express spirit. F, merge the essence within the form, which is occultly qualified during evolution, with the essence in all form, humanly, in a planetary sense, and cosmically. Attain human, systemic, and cosmic manhood. Achieve mastery on 3 planes of the solar system, humanly speaking. Achieve mastery on 5 planes of the solar system when speaking of a heavenly man. Achieve mastery on 3 cosmic planes when speaking of the cosmic Christ, the Son, or the Logos manifesting objectively. TCF 232 to 233.
Yeah, this comes up in 20, 25 pages. So, yeah, I love this list. There's some great points. You might ask yourself, are you occultly blazing forth and demonstrating fiery objectivity? I like that one. By the way, anytime you have any comments, any thoughts, questions, musings on the material, like to keep it in the framework of the material we're covering. But that's the only caveat. If you have any ideas, dialogue is always more interesting than monologue. So please raise your hand and we'll get to you. Okay. This brings us to a special threshold. Next up, one of the most referred to tabulations in all the blue books, entitled The Microcosmic Sensory Evolution. This is where DK lists just what senses occur on each of the subplanes of each of the planes. And they've been referred to many times in different classes by Michael, and basically any DK theosophist knows this knows this list. So could we get a reader just to go through this list?
Gordon.
Okay. Physical playing, 1. Hearing, 5th subplane, gaseous. Touch feeling, 4th subplane, 1st etheric. Sight, 3rd subplane, super etheric. Taste, 2nd subplane, subatomic. Smell, 1st subplane, atomic. Astral plane, clairaudience, 5th subplane. Psychometry, 4th subplane. Clairvoyance, 3rd subplane. Imagination, 2nd subplane. Emotional idealism, 1st subplane. Mental plane, higher clairaudience, 7th subplane. Planetary psychometry, 6th subplane. Higher clairvoyance, 5th subplane. Discrimination, 4th subplane. Spiritual discernment, 3rd subplane. Response to group vibration, 2nd subplane. Spiritual telepathy, 1st subplane.
Or 6th and 7th if you use the way he's numbering them here. But yeah, this is it's interesting, the numbering, because the he will, at the drop of a hat, just reverse the numbers. He'll say 5th from the bottom counting up, and then in the 2 sentences later he'll say the 3rd. So you have to keep that in mind. But let's go ahead and finish the list, and then we'll talk more about these. A reader, please.
Joe.
Right. Good afternoon. The microcosmic sensory evolution continued. Plane, Buddhic. 1. Comprehension, 5th. 2. Healing, 4th. 3. Divine vision, 3rd. 4. Intuition, 2nd. 5. Idealism, 1st. On the Atmic plane, 1. Beatitude, 7th. 2. Active service, 6th. 3. Realization, 5th. 4. Perfection, 4th. 5. All knowledge, 3rd.
Thank you. Okay. Since DK is going to be spending the next several pages on what is here listed, let's go ahead and continue. Unless you have any thoughts or questions at this point, he goes into each of these senses on each plane and each subplane in some depth, and as we move forward. So I think it would probably the best way to approach this is just to go with the text at this point. But anytime you have any questions, it's go ahead and speak up. Okay, next up, can we get a reader?
Kirsten.
It can be noted that we have not summed up the two planes of abstraction on the Atmic and the Buddhic planes, the reason being that the marked degree of realization, which is the property of initiates of higher degree than that of the adept, and which is beyond the concept of the evolving human unit for whom this treatise is written. We might here, for the sake of clarity, tabulate the 5 different aspects of the 5 senses on the 5 planes, so that their correspondences may be readily visualized using the above table as the basis.
Okay.
Wasn't
First-
there an
Yeah, go ahead.
error in the previous slide? If you go back to, yeah, comprehension 5th, but in the book it is said comprehension 7th subrace.
Yeah. He's numbering. Yeah, that's a good point. He's numbering. That's right. You are correct about that. Let's go back to the yeah, see the that's correct. This is just here. I want to fix that right now, if you guys don't mind. So this should be 7th, right? 7th. Oops. 6th. 5th. 4th. And 3rd. Good eye. Thank you for catching that. I don't know why that happened, but it did. There we go. Okay. Right. So yeah, the there are no senses associated with the first and second subplanes of either the Buddhic or Atmic planes. And good catch. Thank you. Yes, Joe. Joe? You said I and then you cut out.
Yeah,
I believe that it might have been correct the way it was written. I observed that.
Wait a minute before you say that, because look at the page, the actual page. This is one of the reasons I actually include the actual page of
Okay.
Treatise on Cosmic Fire, and you can see that it was mistaken here on the Buddhic. It is indeed the 7th, 6th, 5th, 4th, and 3rd. You see
Okay,
that?
I do want to observe, although my mind doesn't work that quickly, as we barely begun, we saw that there were 2 levels below the level that we as human beings ordinarily even touch upon, below the gaseous.
Right. That's right.
My sense of it is that those 2 are reflected in the highest on the other as we evolve.
Well, my understanding is that the 2 lowest and the 2 highest are not part of, what she's saying here is that the 2 highest subplanes of the Buddhic and Atmic plane, and we're going to be covering this, Joe, in detail. So, but I'll just make this one statement here, which is that the 2 highest subplanes of the Buddhic and Atmic plane that there is no, it's not that there is no senses related, it's that no one who would be in physical incarnation reading this material could have any concept of what those senses might be. And then, so that's above the threshold of human capacity or capability. And then the two lowest subplanes of both the astral and physical planes are below the threshold. So I think that might be what you were talking about. So and we're going to be getting into that right now. So let's do that. So first up, it can be noted that we have not summed up the two planes of abstraction on the atmic and buddhic planes. That means the two highest planes. The reason being that they mark a degree of realization which is the property of initiates of higher degree, that would be 6 initiates, than that of the adept, and which is beyond the concept of the evolving human unit for whom this treatise is written. So I just paraphrased what he is here saying. So DK gives us no sensory correspondence to the two planes of abstraction, the atomic and subatomic planes of the atmic and buddhic planes, here shown grayed out, not because these senses don't exist, but because, quote, they are beyond the concept of the evolving human unit. This is no great surprise, considering how difficult it is to perceive even the 5 senses given for each of these 5. I've put them in the margins here. For instance, we understand the sense of sound, but try to imagine this sense expressing itself as comprehension, meaning presumably that when an initiate's consciousness reaches the lowest 2 subplanes of the Buddhic plane, which happens at the 4th initiation, everything that is heard is immediately and fully comprehended, whether it be a bird song or the voice of the master. Its source and significance is immediately known and taken in and fully comprehended. It's an extraordinary idea to think of. And if you look at the same thing with healing, this is the sense of touch. Imagine that one's sense, the actual sense is itself healing. That we could speculate that would mean that, in any contact, conscious contact, with anyone on the planes of human endeavor would create a healing experience for them. It probably needs to be directed. It's not like if you were bustling through a busy crowd, but if you intend healing, then your touch makes that happen. So it's quite a meditation just to consider each of these senses, especially on the intuitional plane or the Buddhic plane. Any thoughts or questions about this? Okay. These highest subplanes concern the development of chohans of the 6th and 7th degrees. There is an analogy between the subplanes of abstraction on the Buddhic and Atmic planes, the ones we've just been talking about, and the systemic planes of abstraction, the divine or Adi and monadic planes, being correlative and synthetic. We might hypothesize that the realizations gained on the subplanes of abstraction of the Atmic and Buddhic planes prepare a Chohan for the realizations that await him or her on the systemic planes of synthesis. Next, DK tells us, okay, yes, Barbara, go ahead. You might be muted.
Yes. So, um, as I understand it, all of the planes and subplanes are at different vibrational levels. So, when we are talking about these subplanes, is there actually an intermixing of vibrations, or is it more a kind of influence? Um,
Well, the influence comes if one is receptive to that level of vibration, which comes through activating the chakras that are capable of receiving that vibration. You know, if you live in the lower chakras, if you live from the solar plexus downward, you'll have no experience of the higher subplanes at all. There's just no, it's like you don't have the antenna capable of receiving it, you know, but once you start working with the higher chakric energy and unfolding the appropriate egoic petals, that, well, there's a lot of things that make you receptive. Those two things that I just mentioned, as well as being receptive to the esoteric rulers of the signs in astrology, for instance. Also, your soul and personality rays, depending on which rays those are, make you receptive to certain energies that you won't be receptive to otherwise. So there's a number of factors, but the overriding factor is just your level of consciousness, right? So
I'm asking if there is an actual fusion that happens, if it's in the chakra, are the energies, the vibrations actually they're working together, or is it that the
sure. Yeah.
higher vibration in some ways influences?
Well, both actually. I mean, our easiest way of contemplating this is to think of how the mind and emotions work together, right? The mental is very distinct from astral vibrational reality, right? You can focus in the mind and have an experience that really is on mental levels. In fact, that's necessary for evolution. You know, at a certain point, one must do that. But in order to have, you know, as above, so below, to have an appreciation of the nature of the vibrational influences on higher planes, then we can compare the mental and emotional planes and see how we use them together in order to form our understanding of reality. And those who are meditating and otherwise working with the higher energies, hopefully that happens somewhat in this class, are also drawing on the subplanes of the higher subplanes of the mental plane, you know, especially the third, because it brings in a synthetic understanding of the material that we read, you know, and it's accompanied by a very particular vibration, as you pointed out, right? These higher subplane energies. It's this sense of intuition and of presence, for instance, can come from these higher three subplanes. Now, I think once you really are adept on those higher planes, higher subplanes, you have as clear an understanding of their nature and energies as we do in the three worlds. Did that touch on your question? I hope so. I'm not sure if it did, but hopefully so. You know, we are very much looking through a glass darkly, Barbara. We read this material, we stretch with our intuition, we, sift and do word searches to try to correlate in order to gain some additional understanding of reality on these higher levels. But the truth is, we won't know until we have an experience of, and the sense is one of the wonderful things about this chart is that the senses listed give us at least a hint of what to expect and where we're going, what will be revealed, at these higher levels. And also this discussion that we're about to move into, it helps to unfold the reality that we're moving towards. Okay. Who's he here now? Okay, so here he tells us that the same tabulation that he's just given us will again be presented, but this time listed by sense, in order of sense, rather than by plane and subplane, which is what he gives us initially, in order to illustrate the unfoldment of each sense, to get a sense of the nature of each of the senses. So let's start with that. Could we get a reader, please?
Magda, do you want to read?
The first sense, hearing. 1, physical hearing. 2, clairaudience. 3, higher clairaudience. 4, comprehension of 4 sounds. 5, beatitude. The second sense, touch or feeling. 1, physical touch. 2, psychometry. 3, planetary psychometry. 4, healing. 5, active service. The third sense, sight. 1, physical sight. 2, clairvoyance. 3, higher clairvoyance. 4, divine vision. 5, realization.
Thank you. Okay, the only difference in content from the first tabulation is that the Buddhic sense of sound is here described as comprehensions of 4 sounds. He adds this, which probably means comprehension of sound as it demonstrates on the physical, astral, mental, and Buddhic planes, since it says sound on the Buddhic plane. Let's continue. Could we get a reader, please? For the 2 last senses.
The fourth sense, taste. 1, physical taste. 2, imagination. 3, discrimination. 4, intuition. 5, perfection. The fifth sense, smell. 1, physical smell. 2, emotional idealism. 3, spiritual discernment. 4, idealism. 5, all knowledge.
Thank you. Okay. So after this precise listing, TK will now begin an in-depth analysis of the senses that he's listed. So let's start that. Can we get a reader, please?
Before that, I think Maria Christina has something.
Yes, Maria, Christina.
Greetings. I just always stumble on the words clairaudient, on the two slides back, clairvoyant, higher clairaudience. I just wondered if there was any I mean, theoretically, you know, when you're clear,
Well, he's about.
you're clairaudient. Does that
I'm sorry.
mean, what do you hear when you're clairaudient?
Well, it moves it from the ear. For instance, he says that you hear on astral levels with your entire astral sheath. You don't just hear with the ears because it's a fluidic reality, and so uh, it's a hearing reception. It's a hearing form of reception, but it doesn't come through the ears, and it's very specific to the reality that exists on the astral plane, right? You are hearing astral forms, you could say the sound of astral forms, the myriads of sounds. And then with higher clairaudience, then you get into see, regular clairaudience isn't necessarily even a spiritual experience. It's just, he calls them, he calls it psychism, right? That this is true of both clairvoyance and clairaudience. It's not necessarily even guided by the soul at all, it's just the ability to open on astral levels. But when you get to higher clairaudience and higher clairvoyance, then it's soul guided and you are seeing reality then in truth. And he talks about this. And so, yeah, Maria Christina, hopefully that helps a little bit, but it's not localized through the ears and eyes in the same way as it is on the physical plane.
Right. Thank you.
Yeah. Okay. Anyone else? I saw another hand or two.
Diana.
Go ahead.
I am asking about the first sense. I don't know how to mention for the eyes. What is the sense in which plane to have the etheric vision? Is the divine vision or is the higher clairvoyance?
Oh no, it would be higher clairvoyance. Yeah. To etheric vision. See, it's carried down. These capacities are carried down into physical. I mean, in other words, you are in your body having these experiences. And so if you can have higher clairvoyance with your inner sight, and that's some mental functioning, and it would be stimulated by soul awareness, through soul awareness, I should say. So yeah, etheric vision, I think, would be at that level. On the other hand, DK tells us that our eyes are entirely capable of etheric vision, and that it is a purely physical reality. It's just the higher force subplanes, and that there will come a time when, in the Aquarian age, early in the Aquarian age, when the more and more people will come into incarnation with this ability, right? Now that's just a higher degree of physical sight. So, the odd man out in a way is the astral clairvoyance, because that is oriented towards the vision on astral levels, right? But seeing the etheric counterpart to what you're looking at physically is, in fact, a higher function of physical sight. I kind of gave you two answers there.
I would guess that etheric vision comes into play here.
I'm sorry, Veronica, not Veronica, Maria Christina, is that you speaking?
Yes, I was just thinking of etheric vision, and all the gnomes and David, creatures that surround us might come into play at that level?
Yeah, see, this is really interesting because they would be perceived through etheric vision if they exist on physical etheric levels. If they are astral forms, you would be seeing them through clairvoyance, not through etheric vision. If they're spiritual / mental forms, then you would have had to have developed higher clairvoyance, which is soul inspired vision, in order to see those higher forms. So it depends on where the forms themselves are centered or located or have their being. You know, for instance, you could look at a person and see their auric emanations, their physical body auric emanations, and it would be a part of physical sight. It's just the you know, for instance, their chakra activity is etheric. It's a part of physical sight, right? But if you're having a vision of their soul, then you are tapping into higher clairvoyance. You know, make sense? I'm actually glad we had this conversation because it made it clear for me as well. Anyone else? Did I see Deanna's hand up again?
No, I don't see it. Magda just wrote the hearing and seeing during a solar samadhi can be described as I hearing the chirping of a bird through my physical ear. I am the ear. I am the chirping sound. I am myself, and I am the bird itself. Same thing with seeing. I see the light. I am light. I see the cosmic and neuronal web, and I am those webs. On what plane does this happen?
Well, this is the synthetic sense, you know, with it starts here, let me get rid of this chat. So here, let's go back because I don't see it listed here. So the sixth and seventh senses of the mental plane are, first of all, correlative and then synthetic. And that's true of all the senses, that the highest pairing of the senses, the two that stand above the five, are always, first of all, correlative. That is, that they interrelate the sense experience. And then finally, on this highest subplane, they are synthesized. So, you know, when you say, for instance, here, let me pull up your chat again. You know, yes, you hear the chirping of above through your physical ear, but as soon as you get to I am the ear, I am the chirping sound, that means you're actually capable of identifying or having the experience of unity with the source of the sound. And that happens through the synthesizing sense on each plane, right? Depending on what it is that you're on what plane you're working. Yeah. Yeah, thanks for that, Magda. That's exactly, that's a real good example of how the synthetic sense works. It's you employ the idea of identification, the you know, the energy of identification in order to synthesize the sense. Okay, let's get back. Okay, anyone else? Good stuff. this is the best way to actually bring this home, is this kind of conversation. So could we get a reader for this?
And Veronica, you want to read?
Yes, hello.
Hello, I'm Veronica.
I just finished the fixing in Corel in Greek this chart, the other one with the colors, the census. It was quite difficult to do.
Oh my, yeah.
Let us now proceed to take up each of these senses in detail. A. Hearing. This very appropriately is the first sense to be manifested. The first aspect of manifestation is that of sound, and necessarily, therefore, we would expect sound to be the first thing noticed by man on the physical plane, the plane of densest manifestation and of the most marked effect of sound, regarding it as a creating factor. Preeminently, the physical plane is the plane of hearing, and hence the sense ascribed to the lowest plane of evolution and of each of the five planes. On this seventh or lowest plane, man has to come to full cognizance of the effect of the sacred word as it is in process of sounding forth. As it reverberates throughout the system, it drives matter into its appointed place and on the physical plane finds its point of deepest materiality and of most concrete demonstration.
Thank you, Anne Veronica.
Thank you.
Okay, first, hearing. This, very appropriately, is the first sense to be manifested. The first aspect of manifestation is that of sound. So this is true involutionally as well. And necessarily, therefore, we would expect sound to be the first thing noticed by man on the physical plane, the plane of densest manifestation, and of the most marked effects of sound, regarding it as a creating factor. Note that the focus here is on sound creation, suggesting that sound reception is a means of being influenced by sound creation. Yes, Sam, Veronica, go ahead.
Did I understand right? Coming down, the first sense is the sound, and again coming up, the first sense is the sound. That's why you call the sound of creation the sound of the physical plane.
Yeah, that's exactly correct. It's
but the chart we have,
yeah,
it's the sound on the physical plane, and it starts from down to up.
right.
Is that it? Yes. Okay. Thank you.
Yeah, if you remember, I think it was 2 webinars ago, and we reviewed it in the last webinar, that HPB exactly reverses the order of the senses. And at first, you think, how could that be? Especially since DK was, you could say, a part of HPB's team of those helping her write the Secret Doctrine. Well, the more I thought about this, I think what it is just simply that she's listing the involutional impress. In other words, humanity first is responsive to sound. This is true, for instance, of the first root race. It's first responsive to sound. And then the next response is to touch, and then to sight, right? And then to taste, and finally to hearing. But on the evolutional, on the path of return, it reverses. In other words, you're not coming from above downwards through development of the senses. You now have developed a sense, and you are progressing upwards through the senses. And so there's a seeming reversal of the paradigm, but you could say they're both true, just depending on the direction.
I seem to remember that we said that coming down we develop the senses, and going up we use them. Didn't we say something like that?
You're coming down, you develop the senses, then what?
Coming up, you use them. You start using them.
Yeah, it's really a tricky, it's a tricky thing because you have to look at the way the kingdoms in nature develop. You know, by the time you're a human being, you are well on the evolutional scale, right, on the evolutional path. But the elemental kingdoms exist on the mental, astral, and physical levels in an involutional on an involutional path, and they are part of the Deva kingdom, and therefore are their primary sense is that of hearing, and so that's an example of how hearing is the first to be developed on the way into development of the kingdoms of nature, and that once you have, as a human being, you have developed all the senses, then you use them progressively on the way evolutionally. But if you just look at an infant, they develop sound first. They can hear their mothers even in the womb. Touch is the very next intermediate connective sense between the self and the not self, which is the environment. And then finally, comes vision in terms of the infant's development. So there is a kind of recapitulation in that way. Any other thoughts? Okay. Well, I see hands. Okay, Nisa?
When Veronica was talking about the first to develop, and I kept thinking the last to what? And if hearing is the last to fill in the blank, would it possibly be the last identification with that which is way above us, above my pay?
No, it's see, it's not, first of all, it's the first, it's the first, hearing is the first method, for instance, the first contact with the soul is the inner hearing of this still small voice within, right? The voice of the silence. The other senses, for instance, higher clairvoyance, which would be seeing the soul, comes much, much, much later. I would think even at third or fourth initiation that you actually see on those higher levels.
Well, I was thinking in terms of identifying with the one sound, the primary sound.
Okay.
And that might be the last ultimate identification is the only word that comes to mind.
Yeah, that comes through the Beatitudes. That's here. It's still part of hearing, but it's where it happens that matters, and in this case, you're looking at atmic hearing, where one is able to identify with the source beings of our solar system, for instance, the planetary logos. And in that identification, the sound, the music of the spheres, that idea, that is actually an experience of these higher forms of consciousness through sound. And that is the means by which, this is an actual sense. It's not an experience, it's a sense. That's what we, have to remember, because we see these, some of these descriptions, like active service. How can active service be a sense? But, it is actually a sense that is the higher correspondence to the physical touch. But getting back to hearing, the beatitude itself is a sense. It's not an experience through a sense. It's the sense itself, which is really mind blowing. But through that sense, one hears. See, you're just stuck with the word. Hears the sound of the those levels of being that are beyond, that are impressing the fifth and sixth initiates, like the logoi, and the seventh planetary logoi would be, the quote unquote music of the spheres that you would be able to tune into. Okay.
Mhm. Thank you. Mhm.
Anybody else? I saw another hand go up. Yeah, about the same time. Okay. No, did I read this yet? Let's see. It's very. I think I did. Yeah. Yeah, I did. Okay. So DK explores the reason that sound is the first aspect of manifestation in this quote from Letters on Occult Meditation. This really adds a lot of light on what we've been talking about. Can we get a reader, please? Mikhail.
Yeah, Maria Christina.
First,
But if you're able to get any closer to your mic,
okay,
Maria.
sure. First, let us repeat the truism that the worlds are the effect of sound. First life, then matter. Later, the attraction of the matter to the life for purposes of its manifestation and expression, and the orderly arrangement of that matter into the necessary forms. Sound formed the allying factor, the propelling impulse, and the attractive medium. Sound, in an occult and deeply metaphysical sense, stands for that which we term the relation between, and is the creating intermediary, the linking third factor in the process of manifestation. It is the akasha. On the higher planes, it is the agent of the great entity who wields the cosmic law of gravitation in its relation to our solar system, whilst on the lower planes, it demonstrates as the astral light, the great agent of reflection that fixes and perpetuates on its vibratory bosom the past, the present, and the future, or that which we call time. In direct relation to the lower vehicle, it manifests as electricity, prana, and the magnetic fluid. A simplification of the idea may come to you, perhaps, in the recognition of sound as the agent of the law of attraction and repulsion.
Thank you, Maria Christina.
Wow.
Any thoughts? But yeah, it's like some cool stuff here. Any thoughts or questions about this? Okay, next up. Preeminently, the physical plane is the plane
Can we
of
go
hearing.
back to that a little bit? Wow. I mean, it's the relation between. That's
That's
love.
it.
That's the Christ. That's a second solar system. That's pretty
Yes.
outrageous.
Well, the nature of the sound of the second solar system is has the quality of the second ray, which is that synthesizing quality of love, wisdom, and of course that's the hallmark of the Christ. But there's other kinds of sound, of course. There's also vril, which is a means of destroying any form whatsoever. So it's, sound has an infinite variety. And there's specific sounds associated with each of the 7 rays as well. Right.
It's worthy. I'm going to keep pondering this one. The agent of attraction and repulsion. Thank you. Wow.
Yeah, this is a really terrific quote from this Letters of Occult Meditation. We could go through this and talk about everything in here. It's a deeply metaphysical sense.
Yeah.
And as you said, it's the means by which Fohat binds matter and spirit. It's, in other words, the will to be is sent forth by the Logos, and then the entire Davidic kingdom, under the guidance of the creative agency, sounds the note that where creation starts. I always think of the second stanza in of stanzas of dawn and treatise on cosmic fire, where it begins with Om said the mighty one, and then it tells what happens as when that sound is sounded forth, and it's very specific. And then when we look at it, initiation human solar, we find out that that AUM actually are 3 groups of sounds, the A, the U, and the M, that each have all these component groups. And it's in the mastery of these groups that the creative agency is actually implemented. I saw another hand. And Veronica, who was that?
Well, yes, I have my hand up also.
Okay.
First of all, basically it says here that sound is everything. And I would love for us to go, because it's electricity. If you use sound, it's electricity. You use sound, you're using the law of attraction and repulsion. It's so many things here.
Yeah, it's I would always be careful of saying it's everything, because then the problem with it being everything is then it becomes nothing, because we have no way of distinguishing it, right? But I like to think of it as the means by which the two become one, and the means by which the one initially becomes, the many, where all diversity is created. It's literally articulated, right? Articulation is a word connected with sound, right? To articulate your speech, right? And in that move from the one to diversity, that's what's happening. The forms are articulated by the creative potencies and the Davidic kingdoms who respond to the sense of sound actually create the forms. Yeah.
I'm thinking of climatics, of when sound creates patterns, and certain vibrations will create one pattern, and other vibration will create an entirely different geometric pattern. So
Right.
I'm thinking also of harmonics, that harmonics will create forms. And it isn't that the harmonics fuse, each of the harmonic sound stays in its own vibration, but it's the relationship that creates a sound reality.
Yeah, some good thoughts there. Yeah, the idea that you can literally see, the patterns that sound creates. There's like you can sound effects, for instance, iron filings, and they form specific patterns depending on the sound that goes forth, So if it's happening on, literally on the dense physical, you know that it's happening at every level. And I think harmonics are a big part of that creation. It makes me think of the, I can't remember the name of the Tibetan monks. There's a particular sect of Tibetan monks that are adept at these overtones that you were describing, and you can hear them singing through the primary tone, and you can't help it and think that they are actually building thought forms, building a kind of psychic reality through the sounding of these variations of overtones within the primary tone. It's and the effect of it, on your own experience is, at least I saw them perform in Santa Fe at Palo Solari, and I think everyone was lifted into this extraordinary state through sound. Yeah, it was amazing. Any other thoughts? Good stuff, guys. Yes, Tom.
Yeah, I think I read DK now that it is not mathematical legal language, but a more metaphysical language that where certain concepts have different meanings depending on the context. And in this phrase, the sound is almost like Fohat himself, or even more in one sense, and then he uses it in many senses. So it's not in other context he uses it more specific sense. The same is with grammar book when I read it. Grammar is somehow everything, and then it is just on emotional level. So this is, to me, it is kind of more intuitional language than definitional language.
Yeah, it can be both. And so many of DK's concepts can be very specifically applied in context to a hierarchy of similar concepts, or it can have a much broader meaning, as you mentioned. Glamour is an example of that. But sound is, in relation to Fohat, manifests primarily on the atmic plane. In other words, that's the initiating. Oops, somebody's got a live mic they need to turn off. That's the initiating plane in terms of the creative sound going forth. On Buddhic planes, Fohat manifests as color, and that's a further conditioning of the forms that are initiated through sound, right? And that a very complex process of diversification happens on the mental planes. This is covered in ToCF, and where the how Fohat demonstrates on each of the planes, starting with the Akashic on monadic planes, going all the way down into the physical. It's about a 15-page section or so. Okay, so next, preeminently the physical plane is the plane of hearing, and hence the sound sense of ascribed to the lowest plane of evolution and of each of the 5 planes. This last phrase, and each of the 5 planes, suggests that the particular sense of hearing associated with each of the 5 planes, as given in the tabulation, manifests on the lowest subplane of each plane, as shown here. Now, that doesn't mean that that's the only plane where they have any effect, but that this is, you could say, home ground for the sense of sound, the sense of hearing, is this 7th subplane of each of the planes. However, since the physical plane is the 7th in its entirety, then physical hearing can be experienced on any of these 7 subplanes. Next, on this seventh or lowest plane, man has to come to full cognizance of the effect of the sacred word as it is in process of sounding forth. The effect of the sacred word as it in process of sounding forth. So ultimately, full cognizance of the effect of the sacred word is hearing and understanding the voice of the silence, the small voice of the soul, still small voice of the soul. DK says, the brain can be trained to recognize the sound and vibrate in unison with the breath. He hears the sound, called sometimes the still small voice. He recognizes it for what it is, and in deep reflection, he assimilates it for what it is. He assimilates the result of his soul's activity. I'll read that last part again. He recognizes it for what it is, and in deep reflection, he assimilates the results of his soul activity. All this coming through the sense of hearing. Yeah, I love this quote. And next, as it reverberates throughout the system, it drives matter into its appointed place. And on the physical plane, finds its point of deepest materiality and of most concrete demonstration. So in the previously cited quote from Letters on Occult Meditation, we learned that sound is the creating intermediary, the linking third factor in the process of manifestation, and manifests on the lower planes as electricity, prana, and magnetic fluid, all of which are agents for the law of attraction and repulsion. Okay, next up, can we get a reader, please?
Yeah, a few comments first. I don't know how far back this one goes. The master, for Magda, the master will have flashes of monadic consciousness, but he will be working in the triad. What does this but involve? And then there really isn't monadic consciousness. AAB, we use the word because we have no other word, AAB letters. Is she implying that there's no other name for it or something else? And then identification, Michael Robbins made up a neologism with this word, acrasis, union of two words. Do you remember what it was? What was this word? And Diana said infuception and sameness.
Infuception, yeah. That's what I remember, yeah. Yeah, I'm not sure what let's see, from Megda, the master will have flashes of monadic consciousness, right? Because once one becomes soul infused and the causal body is shattered and you move on to the lower subplanes of the Buddhic plane, then the inspiration is unveiled from the monad, and you work then with that energy from that time on. And so, just as we have flashes of soul consciousness, so the master has flashes of monadic consciousness. And it's true that the master works primarily in the triad, or entirely, you could say, in the triad, except for in his service activity in the three lower worlds. But you have a phrase here that says, what does this but involve? I have no idea what you mean by that. Unless it's what comes next, which then there really isn't monadic consciousness. Well, that's the tricky one, because the term consciousness for us is completely expansive. We use the word to say, the consciousness of the one about whom now may be said. But technically, consciousness is a relating activity, and it has to do with soul. At monadic levels, you move into this field called identification, which is, Michael preferred the word, and so do I really, of identicality. That is, the sense of separateness is truly erased, and you join through this quality of identicality or identification. Yeah, AAB says we use the word because we have no other words. There's no other name for it. Yeah. He did a lot of these neologisms. The one I remember is infuception, but that's a very specific word that means ception is a sensory orientated part of the word, right? That like reception, right? But instead of reception would suggest the gaining of perception from something else. Infuception suggests that it's done through this process of identification. That's how I understand that word. Yeah. Okay, good. All right. Okay, reader, please. Yeah.
And then Nasa has her hand up.
Yes, Nisa.
Yeah, going back to the bottom of the last one that you were doing.
Okay.
And
this one?
No, yeah. And it's talking about driving matter into its appointed place.
Mm-hmm.
Is that
what is that?
I'm just thinking in terms of our consciousness is our job to, from the other side, be receptive to this driving force so that we find our appropriate place in the universe, kind of thing.
Well, the way I see this is in creation, and this could be the creation of a thought form. So its appointed place is determined by the will of the creator, right? So whoever is sounding forth the word has in mind some creation. For instance, the creation of a thought form in order to uplift humanity might be an example of a form where that matter, and this would be mental matter, would then be driven into a particular configuration where this thought form could then function, right? Yeah. So
thank you.
Our response to sound reconfigures our own form aspect. That's why we're always shedding inappropriate matter and taking on a higher grade of matter. You could say it's in response to this, the voice of the silence sent forth by the soul, which is itself creative, and we're the results of that creation, right? Okay.
Thank you.
Yeah, you bet. Reader, please.
Miri, you want to read?
The key for man to discover and turn concerns itself with the revealing of the mystery A, his own sound, B, his brother's sound, C, his group sound, D, the sound of that one of the heavenly man with whom he is connected, E, the sound of the Logos, or the sound of nature, of the solar system, of the grand man of the heavens. Therefore, we note that on the physical plane, a man has to find his own note, finding it in spite of the density of the form. A, on the physical plane, he finds his own note. And B, on the astral plane, he finds his brother's note. Through identity of emotion, he comes to the recognition of his brother's identity.
Thank you. Okay, first, the key for man to discover and turn concerns itself with the revealing and the mystery of A, his own sound. One's own sound gradually comes to be known through the long journey into self-awareness that finally, after eons, culminates in soul infusion. And then later, through monadic identification. In Esoteric Psychology Volume 1, DK tells us that each of the rays emits its own sound, suggesting that finding one's note would include entering the stream of one's ray sound. This is beautifully expressed a bit later in a treatise on cosmic fire. Could we get a reader, please?
Misa, you want to read?
Yes. The knower will utter the three great words in his own true key, thus blending his own sound with the entire volume of vibration and thereby achieving sudden realization of his essential identity with those who utter the words. The sound of matter or of Brahma peals forth in his ears on all the planes. He will see all forms as illusion and will be freed, knowing himself as omnipresent. As the sound of Vishnu reverberates within himself, he knows himself as perfected wisdom and distinguishes the note of his being or that of the heavenly man in whose body he finds place from the group notes and knows himself as omniscient. As the note of the diva aspect follows upon the other two, he realizes himself as pure spirit, and on the consummation of the chord is merged in the self or the source from which he came. Mind is not, matter is not, and not is left, but the self merged in the ocean of self.
Thank you, Nisa. So we can see that sound is a huge part of the upper journey of releasing those forms that no longer serve us and moving into the newer, more appropriate forms. Since sound is the means of all creation, when a disciple finally knows his or her own sound, he or she can then become a true creator. Can we get a reader, please?
Tom.
The idea, the cause back of the object, form, the word, sound which produces form, the object, the form produced by the sound to express the idea. Always in the process of arriving at an understanding of nature, the occultist works inwards from the external form in order to discover the sound which created it, or the aggregate of forces which produce the external shape. Every aggregate of forces has its own sound produced by their intellect. Having discovered that, he penetrates still further inwards till he touches the cause, idea, or divine thought emanating from the logos, planetary, or solar, which gave rise to the sound, thus producing form. In creative work, the adept starts on the inside, and knowing the idea which he seeks to embody in form, he utters certain words or sounds, and thus calls in certain forces which produce, through their interplay, a form of some kind. The higher the level on which the adept works, the more elevated the ideas touched, and the simpler or more synthetic the sounds uttered.
Thank you, Tom. Thoughts or questions about this passage? I think it's pretty clear about the creative force as sound. Okay, next, the key for a man to discover in turn, we always go back to this first line, concerns itself with the revealing of the mystery of B, his brother's sound. So again, we'll turn to the light of the soul for this reading, and this will do it for today's session. Can we get a reader, please?
And Paka.
Okay. There must be recognition of the contact that comes between two men who can see, hear, and touch each other. A superficial form recognition is the result. But another stage is possible wherein a man can pass behind the form and arrive at that which is the quality of his brother. He can touch that aspect of the consciousness which is analogous to his own. He becomes aware of the quality of his brother's life, of the nature of his plans, aspirations, hopes, and purposes. He knows his brother, and the better he knows himself and his own soul, the deeper will be his knowledge of his brother. Finally, he can identify himself with his brother and become as he is, knowing and feeling as his brother's soul knows and feels. This is the meaning behind the occult words of St. John's epistle, "We shall be like him, for we shall see him as he is."
Thank you, Anne.